Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name's Megsy, and today I'm going to be doing half of my March reading wrap-up. I am on track to read about 12 books probably by the time we hit the end of the month, so I decided to divide this wrap-up up into two parts because no one wants to hear me talk about books for over an hour. That's just way too long, and my computer will probably crash trying to edit and upload that video. So, I'll be going over the 6 books I read the first half. Most of these were quite short, around 250 pages or less. I read books, particularly in the first half, that were about very weird people doing weird things, and also dystopias in the future that are also quite plausible. So, if any of those are interesting to you, please stick around. As always, the names of all the books I will be reviewing in the video will be listed down below. And we will get started. The first book I finished in the month of May was Scattered All Over the Earth by Yoko Tawada, translated from Japanese by Margaret Mitsutani. This is a sort of dystopian-esque novel where, due to climate change, the island of Japan has completely disappeared, and with it, all of the memory of Japanese culture and language. And so we follow about 4 or more different characters in this piece. It begins in the Netherlands, I think, with this man named Nut, and he sees this woman on TV named Hiroko. And he can't quite place what her ethnicity is, but she's on this show where they're interviewing people of countries that no longer exist. And hers, literally, the landmass no longer exists because due to rising sea levels, Japan sunk in the ocean. And so because of this, people suddenly don't remember Japanese people or their language or culture, and she's on a mission to find someone who shares her background. And so he takes it upon himself. He wants to meet her, and they link up, and they decide that they want to meet up with this famous sushi chef who has advertisements all over the city because they believe he is obviously Japanese. And so along the way, it becomes a sort of traveling cast of characters on a mission to reignite Hiroko with someone who's Japanese, who she can speak Japanese with. I enjoyed this. I thought it was okay. It wasn't particularly outstanding. I rated it 4 stars on Goodreads, but maybe it'd be more like 3.5. I thought there were a couple interesting quotes in here about culture and language and identity and what does it mean to be part of like an erased identity. I feel like maybe the book could have gone a little deeper in some of these themes, but it was interesting. I don't really have too much to say about it. It is part of a trilogy, and I think the thing, though, you can sort of tell because it doesn't obviously wrap up because it is the first of a trilogy. And there is a character very later on in the book that is randomly introduced in his backstory. And that is part of where the book kind of got a little weird because there was some sort of like weird thing this character had with robots. It kind of was giving me a little bit of like Alissa nutting vibes, like Made for Love. And I was like, uh-oh, are we going to go down a weird road? Because I don't really want to go down this road. I mean, it like almost did, but anyway. Yeah, I thought it was fine. I just didn't really, I don't feel compelled, though, to read the sequel, so I'm not quite sure what that says. Maybe I should reevaluate my rating. A lot of people did rate this book negatively, and that is because there is a trans character. She becomes part of the traveling cast of characters who is on the mission to reignite Hiroko with the Japanese sushi chef. And for some reason, even though she states that she is specifically a woman, she is in the early stage of her transitioning to be a woman, everyone keeps calling her he and a man in a dress. And I can understand if, like, people are just meeting her, you know, because we get more and more characters being added to this whole troupe of people, but even her friends that she's traveling with keep referring to her as a man. And a lot of people were calling that out in their reviews, and I don't understand what the author's intention was. I'm sure it has to do something with, like, identities and stuff like that, but I don't know why you had to keep referring to the trans character as a man, the trans woman. So yeah, that was a little weird. I kind of was side-eyeing Yoko Tawada. I was like, what are you saying here, ma'am? But yeah, it was okay. It wasn't bad. 3.5 to 4 stars. The next book I read in the month of May was Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke and Other Misfortunes by Eric LaRocca. I picked this up in a little lending library, and I have heard about this book from booktube. And I saw a booktuber I watch regularly called Frankie's Shelf reviewed this book and said how terrible it was. They only reviewed, like, the first short story. There's 3 stories in this book, the title story, and I should have trusted their advice. But I was curious, and I regret it. I rated this book 1 star. It was one of the worst things I have read in recent years. The writing was atrocious. I'm appalled that this was published. It was published by Titan Publishing, Titan Books. They're not like an indie press. I mean, not a major press, but they're not like an indie press. All right. So what can I even say about this? This literally, the stories in this collection literally read like someone wrote a draft of what they wanted to write, like an outline. The first story is probably the best, which is not saying much. It is, like I said, the title story, and it is about these 2 women, 2 lesbians in the early 2000s who meet on this, like, online message board for LGBT people, and the one woman, Agnes, is selling an heirloom apple peeler that was in her family, and she gets into this correspondence with this other woman named Zoe, and Zoe becomes interested in buying the apple peeler, and they begin to talk about other things, and Agnes talks about how she was disowned from her parents because she came out, and then Zoe's like, oh, I don't actually want to take it, and then she just gives her, like, a huge sum of money, and Agnes becomes forever grateful, and so they continue to have a correspondence. All of this is told via emails and AIM messages. And they enter into this, like, master-slave relationship, and Zoe keeps telling Agnes to do things that are outside of her comfort zone, like go out and buy a bright red dress and wear it to work, and wear bright red lipstick, take off your underwear and leave it in the bathroom. And, you know, Agnes does these things, and all these other ridiculous stuff, like, I want you to sleep naked with the air conditioning on because I'm your master, and all that stuff. And then you think that slowly this is going to progress into Zoe goading Agnes into committing this horrific crime, because you can see how it's leading there with what she's telling her to do. And it doesn't, and it goes completely in a really weird left field direction that is extremely disgusting, but also felt cheap. Like, not worth at all the buildup. It was so nasty. Also, people did not... Look, I'm old enough to have remembered and used AIM, AOL Instant Messenger. People did not talk like this on AOL Instant Messenger. The way he writes these women, it's, like, super formal, the way they're communicating. There's no abbreviations. There's no emoticons. I had to pull that one out of my brain when I was thinking about this. It sounds like the same person, also even in their emails. The author is younger than me, so maybe he just is too young to know how people actually talked on AOL Instant Messenger, but... And then it gets worse. The next story, The Enchantment, this is, again, like I said, one of the worst things I've ever read. I am appalled that this was published. It was, again, like an outline of a story. Scenes changed abruptly, like almost like it was, again, almost like it was written like a play, but it's not. He tells us, like, at the end of, like, a chapter how we should be feeling, or directly how the characters are feeling. It's this kid who kills himself. He was a religious nut. And the way he kills himself is also so ridiculous. Like, it's not even possible for one person to do this the way he did it. And then his parents, for some reason, his dad takes a job on some island. That's never really delved into why, for, like, research purposes. And a mysterious stranger shows up who's, like, a guardian angel or a demon. And I'm not even going to bother summarizing it. Or the last story, because it was so bad. It was so bad. I am just appalled at the writing. This is how he'll start chapters, right? 14. The following afternoon, period. The young man enters the master bedroom and finds Olive arranging her suitcase on the bureau. Here's another one. Later that night, Olive lazes in bed. Like, this person, obviously, this author has, like, religious trauma, but the way it's written about is, like, very, very juvenile, like. However, Olive already knows full well it's something he'll never consider, no matter how much she begs, no matter how much she pleads with him. This place is no longer his home. Stop telling us this. Stop telling us this. Go back and workshop this. I cannot believe this gives me confidence in my own writing. 1 star, 1 star. And I do not normally give books 1 star. It is very rare, but this is 1 star level. Do not read. The next book I finished in May was Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh, and I actually really liked this. I was surprised how much I liked this, because if you've watched this channel, any of my videos, or a couple of my videos, I've mentioned that I did not like her writing. I did not like My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which is her most popular, well-known book. And I saw a couple vlogs about reading authors, giving them a second chance that you previously didn't like their work. And then I saw a woman on the train. She was reading Eileen. She was seated next to me. And I was like, okay, it was right at my local branch. I'm like, all right, let's do this. Let's try this. And this was really, really well done. I mean, it is wild how you can have such a different reaction to the same author, but different works. And I think one of the reasons why I really like this is because it reminded me a lot of a Joyce Carol Oates novel. Not in the writing. She has a very different writing style from Oates, but the setting and the characters and the plot and how it unfolds, it's very Oatesian. I'm kind of surprised no one has mentioned that when they discuss, like, influences in her work. I think another reason, this is more for personal reasons, but the character Eileen, there were so many aspects of her life that remind me of a friend of mine. It was a little weird. And so I think because she reminded me, her situation reminded me so much of a friend of mine, I think I, like, naturally almost had, like, this built-in empathy for her. So anyway, the story is, it takes place in, like, the early to mid-60s in this small town in the Northeast, Massachusetts. And Eileen she's in, like, her mid-20s, and she's working at this boys' reformatory, essentially a prison detention center, like a juvenile detention center. And she lives with her father. Her mom died from something, presumably cancer, probably, and when she was in college. And her dad is an alcoholic. He's a retired cop who was he was taken off the force, like, dishonorably. And she just sort of lives with him in this place that is just like a pigsty, and he doesn't appreciate her. He takes her for granted. No one really notices her. She thinks that she's so mousy and ugly, and she has this, like, very active imagination, and she would much rather admire men from afar. She has, in the beginning of the novel, this, like, one thing for one of the prison guards, Randy, that works there. So the story is told from the present, when she is an older woman, and she is reminiscing about this time in her life and, like, what it led up to, this, like, culminating in this event that then made her then finally take the plunge to leave her hometown and move. And the big catalyst is that the detention center hires this young woman named Rebecca, and Eileen becomes fascinated with Rebecca. And there is sort of this like subtle homoeroticness between the two women. Although Eileen is like quick to tell you, I am not a lesbian. And they develop this sort of weird friendship, but you can tell Rebecca is hiding something. Ultimately, Eileen unknowingly walks into this sort of trap and becomes an accomplice to this sort of vigilante crime that Rebecca is plotting. So I actually did not see the twist coming. I think that I don't think Moshfegh's prose in and of itself is particularly exemplary, but I think that the way she crafts characters and setting and dialogue, like all of these characters felt so real to me. And like everyone is very nuanced, and just the way she gets down like people's little mannerisms and their tics, it's really well done. It's alluded to that Eileen has this sort of like this mild eating disorder, and she abuses laxatives, and she has this really, really terrible self-image. And what I liked was that in hindsight, because she's telling this as an older woman, this story to us, she's able to really realize how ridiculous she was, like how it was so naive and absurd the way she pined for people afar, how she had no idea how relationships work, how she had this negative image, and she's able to like look back on like the ridiculousness of her youth. There is some ambiguity in the ending, and I think some people might not like that, but it didn't bother me, because it honestly kept me wondering about, like, I was wondering, like, after I read it, like, wait, I think one of my favorite quotes is when she says, talking about men she dated, I put up with him for a while because I thought maybe he was pointing to some dark truth about myself, and I suppose he was. I was a fool to be with a man like him. I was a fool about men in general. I learned the long way about love, tried every house on the block before I got it right. Now, finally, I live alone. I didn't have any criticisms of this work, and I rated it 5 stars. The next book I finished in the month of May was You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat. This was okay. It was kind of mediocre, honestly. It reads more like a memoir. It is structured more like a memoir because it doesn't really have a plot structure in the way a novel does. It feels more like a series of blurbs on different events in this character's life. It is honestly, reading like the inside flap, you kind of almost like know everything that happens. So the main character, she's never named. She is this young Palestinian American woman. This is like sometime in like the 2010s, living in Brooklyn, and she breaks up with her girlfriend, and she goes to this rehab that is for not just substance abuse addicts, but like addicts of any kind, and she is a love and sex addict. And so most of the book takes place while she is at this rehab center. And I've realized I'm not really like a huge fan of those kinds of novels because it's been done so much before, and unless you're gonna like add something really new or the writing is gonna be like really top notch, I'm just not really interested in it because they all kind of blend into the same thing. So we get like at the rehab center like these different flashbacks and stuff like that, and how she's had this really volatile, unstable relationship with her mother, who is very volatile and straight up actually emotionally abusive. And her mother like is never, when she comes out to her mom is of course not accepting of her being LGBT. And then we get like reminiscences of her early sexual experiences with, she's bisexual, but I think it focuses a lot more on like her relationships with women slightly. And also there's like interspersed with like visits to like Jordan and Palestine and She has like an eating disorder too, but it's not really talked about that much. That was sort of like my issue with this, was that like besides the lack of plot and how it really felt like a memoir, there was a lot of complex topics here that we just like barely scratched the surface, and the writing felt very simplistic. It wasn't bad, but I think I just like writers that have more sorry, it's like glowing. It's just, I don't know, take like a little more of a challenge in the way they structure their sentences and play with like craft and stuff like that. This actually reminded me a lot of Catalina by Karla Villavicencio. Again, because it's like something advertised as a novel that reads like a memoir where the main character has a lot in common with the author, like almost identically. And so I'm kind of like getting annoyed of like these books that are sold as novel but are really just a memoir. I don't know. I know there's aspects that are fictionalized, but I felt like Catalina, though, had a little bit more of like a plot structure even, at least towards the end, and also the character, like what she was saying at least, was more interesting to me and compelling than this narrator, this character. So I don't know. I just think that it was just okay for me. It wasn't anything particular outstanding. It's just 3 stars. The next book I read and finished in the month of May was Homesick for Another World by Ottessa Moshfegh. This is a collection of short stories, and I did mention reading this book in my anti-TBR video, and I said I didn't really care for it. I did revise my opinion because it did get better as it went along. I think the first 6 stories I was just not a fan of. It felt like, though, a lot of this was kind of trying too hard to be gross and shocking for the sake of being gross and shocking, and it kind of feels like a one-trick pony. Like, okay, like, can we do something else with this? Because a lot of these stories just end very abruptly. And a lot of it is about just like Moshfegh writing about weirdos, like people who live on the fringes of society, whether they are drug addicts, the mentally ill, just weird people they're out like seeking something, sometimes sex, sometimes just some sort of like emotional connection, and how they interact with others. It didn't really get good, I think, until the stories Slumming, An Honest Woman, and A Better Place. Those to me were like the 3 standouts of the collection. I think that Moshfegh is good, like I said in Eileen, about creating these unique characters and their idiosyncrasies, because all the characters are very memorable in this. But I just feel like I've seen this fiction done better, like in Chavisa Wood's Things to Do When You're Goth in the Country, that also has like people who are social misfits living on the fringes of society in these sort of like rundown, forgotten areas. I mean, that collection focuses on the Midwest, whereas this collection is focused either in Los Angeles, like outside of Los Angeles, or in New York City. And I just feel like that specific collection in comparison to this wasn't really cheapened so much by like the shock value or the grossness of it. Like the grossness worked in Eileen because it was a really good view into the character's psyche and her living condition with her dad and her eating disorder, but again, here just felt more, like I said, shock value. So again, some good stories, but some not so good stories, and the rest just kind of mediocre. So I rated it 3 stars. And the last book I will be discussing in this video for the first half of my May wrap up is The Dream Hotel by Lalami. I think that's how you say her name. This is a dystopian sci-fi novel that is basically like Black Mirror meets an updated 1984. And instead of just like government totalitarianism, it is, well, very relevant to late-stage capitalism in our time period, where private surveillance corporations have merged with the state to profit off of these prevention safety measures. And so sometime in the near distant future, 2040s or whatever, we follow this protagonist, Sarah. She is a Moroccan-American archivist, and she is detained at LAX airport because she has this high social credit score. I don't know if they actually use those words, but again, taken a lot from Black Mirror. And while she's there, they're like going through like her background and all that, and they find out, they're like, oh, like, well, we have access to your dreams because of this device you use, and we can see that you are high risk because you've had dreams about killing your husband. And then she is detained in this random detention center in California with a bunch of other women, and she really has no legal constitutional rights whatsoever. The backstory is that this device that was implanted in her was supposed to help with her insomnia that she had when her children were born, and the company ended up selling the user's data to these private surveillance firms that were then like merged with the state. So the story, it switches back and forth between the present while Sarah is in detention and the past. We see all of these detainees are there where they are considered at risk of committing crimes. And there's a decent amount of characters, both the prisoners and the guards. And sometimes I couldn't really keep track of all of them because I think this is sort of my issue. And I said this in another video with Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. Sometimes in these sort of dystopian sci-fi novels, there is so much emphasis on world building that I think the characterization suffers. I don't think Sarah, her characterization suffered, but some of the other characters that were in the background, I kind of had a hard time keeping track of them. And I mean, honestly, everything that happens in this, it does feel very real and very scary. I mean, the monitoring of people on social media and detaining them for politically unacceptable views. I mean, that is literally all that is happening right now. I mean, I think I like finished this actually not that long when the streamer Hassan Piker was detained for a period of time. Overall, this book was good. I rated it 4 stars, but it's not like 5-star material for me because I felt like at times it was a little too didactic and on the nose. There was also like a loose end that I felt was just sort of forgotten about. We also, a little bit more than midway, we follow a character for a chapter, but again, it's like we don't really, you think this character is gonna like link back up with the protagonist, but yeah, I don't know. It felt like a loose end, and I don't know if she intends to write a sequel. So overall, you know, I think if you like Black Mirror, or you want like an updated 1984, just the capitalist surveillance hellscape version, I think that you would like this. And I've rated it 4 stars. So that is it. Those are the 6 books I finished in the first half of May. And please stick around if you want to see the next 6 or so books I will finish in May. Please comment, like, subscribe, hit the like button, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.